I don't think the issue with Donald Trump is cognitive issues. Certainly not in the way that was
He
an issue
says some pretty
for Joe
wild
Biden.
or indeed largely incomprehensible things in his campaign
Right,
speeches.
right. And my point is that I'm not sure those are cognitive issues. That's just the way he is.
This time last week, Joe Biden was still the candidate for the Democratic Party in this year's race to the White House. But of course, since then, Kamala Harris has replaced him, and it seems to have somewhat put a spoke in what looked like a progress by Donald Trump towards re-election on November the 5th. Well, let's see whether that is the case. And we can speak now to Gerald Seib. He's a former executive editor of the Wall Street Journal, a contributor to the Sunday Times, and a senior mentor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure.
The events of the last week, do you think they have really opened up the race so we can't have any confidence about who's going to win?
Oh, they absolutely have. They've transformed the race. It was astonishing to see Democrats rally behind Kamala Harris. We at the Wall Street Journal took a poll right after the change, and the most astonishing number in that poll was that before the change, when Joe Biden was still the presumptive nominee, 37% of Democrats said they were enthusiastic about their choice. With Kamala Harris now the presumptive nominee, 81% of Democrats said they were enthused about their choice. So the first thing you got was a shot of energy through the Democratic Party, which was badly in need of it. And the poll showed overall that whatever lead Donald Trump had over Joe Biden, and it wasn't huge, but it was there and it was consistent, has been wiped out. It's now essentially an even race. This does not mean it'll stay that way by any means. Doesn't mean Kamala Harris doesn't have her own vulnerabilities. She has them. She has a lot of them, actually. But if you were talking about, as you were at the outset, a week ago at this time versus this week at this time, it's a totally different race.
How surprised are you that she has turned out to be so popular initially, and also, because a lot of people criticized her when she was vice president?
Yeah, I admit that I'm surprised. And that's in part because I did go watch her as a presidential candidate in her own right in 2020. And, she was not particularly good. She was certainly not an overwhelming candidate. She seemed to have a hard time making the case for herself. It wasn't clear what the point of a Kamala Harris candidacy for president was back then. And I think a lot of us had that picture in mind. I think she's been much better since this change took place. Part of that is that Democrats were so desperate to have somebody look better, more alive than Joe Biden did in political terms. But part of it is she's handled the moment really well. You have to admit that that's the case. I think her underlying vulnerabilities haven't changed, however. One is that she's much more easily caricatured as a San Francisco liberal, which is a pejorative in the American political context, certainly to a lot of people in the middle of the political spectrum. She is more to the left of Joe Biden at a time when I think Democrats might find that their best space is more in the middle of the political spectrum. And the issue on which she's seen with most skepticism by the public is immigration, which happens to be Donald Trump's strongest issue. So all those things will come to the fore. But what she has in front of her now is a period of several weeks in which she can continue to dominate the conversation because she will pick her own vice presidential running mate, and then Democrats will have their convention in Chicago in the second week of August. One of the things that will do is allow her some places where it's easy to maintain both visibility and visibility in a positive context.
And what are your thoughts on the options for her running mate?
Well, everybody seems to think there are three, and they all involve, white males from out in the country, if you will. One is Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. One is Roy Cooper, the governor of North Carolina, and the other is Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona. Those three states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina and Arizona, all happen to be states that Democrats would like to win, that should be within reach, but that seemed out of reach with Joe Biden. So I think the first political impulse is going to be pick somebody who can help you win one of those states. The most important of those states, and it's always important to remember that the presidential election in the U.S. is not a national election. It's a 50 state by 50 state statewide election. Pennsylvania is the most important of those. Josh Shapiro, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, is popular in that state. He's very articulate. He's very good on the stump. He would seem to me to be the most logical choice.
He is Jewish, though.
That may be a plus, in the context in which a lot of the conversation is going to be about supporting Israel while also criticizing Israel for the way the war in Gaza is being conducted. There may be certain advantages to that.
Now, what about the Trump campaign? What's the impact of this dramatic change been on them?
Well, they seem a little flummoxed at the moment, to be honest. Donald Trump had his attacks on Joe Biden kind of is set, and they were well rehearsed, and he was reeling them off without any problem. He seems a little less certain how to go on the attack against Kamala Harris, and his whole campaign style is to be on the attack. I mean, there was this thought that maybe Donald Trump will be a kind of a more moderate, kinder, gentler candidate after the assassination attempt on him, and that was true for about a week. It doesn't seem to be true now. I think that they are struggling with how to address a completely different kind of candidate, and one who they know will be better both on the campaign trail in prosecuting the case, as Kamala Harris puts it, against Donald Trump, and also would be much better on the debate stage. One of the things that the Trump campaign has struggled with in the last few days is whether to agree to debate Kamala Harris. I mean, he had agreed to another debate in September with Joe Biden. The assumption had been that would carry over and he would debate Kamala Harris. But now he's saying, wait, no, maybe I won't do that. I agreed to debate Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris. I understand that sentiment. On the other hand, it makes him look as if he's somehow afraid or a little weak in terms of confronting Kamala Harris. And that's not a good look for Donald Trump, who wants to, above all, project strength, not weakness. I think he eventually will debate Kamala Harris in the fall. That will be a fascinating evening. It'll be way different than it was when he was on stage with Joe Biden.
It's also being pointed out that with Biden out, he becomes the oldest ever major nominee for the presidency. Do you think that the cognitive issues that dogged Biden may now transfer to Trump?
Well, first of all, you will hear in the US where I'm sitting, you will hear what you just said about 50 million times between now and the election. Donald Trump is now the oldest candidate, and the Democrats will not let you forget that, first of all. Second of all, I don't think the issue with Donald Trump is cognitive issues. Certainly not in the way that
he says some pretty wild or indeed largely incomprehensible things in his campaign speeches.
Right. And my point is that I'm not sure those are cognitive issues. That's just the way he is. What you will see is renewed attention on that. There was an interesting question in our poll, and I think the issue is more temperament for being president than having the cognitive ability to be president. First time I ever heard a Donald Trump campaign speech was in 2015. And, the Venn diagram of that speech would be just like one of the speech today. It's all over the place. That's not because he's of a declining cognitive ability. It's because that's just the way he is. He bounces around a lot. He's amusing and entertaining, but he's not necessarily always so coherent. I don't think that's a function of age, but I do think there's going to be more attention on that now. This gets to another point that I think is an advantage for Democrats now, which is their theory of this election had all along been the key to winning was to make sure that people focused on the flaws and the failings and the shortcomings and the dangers of Donald Trump. One of the problems they had was that the flaws and failings and shortcomings of Joe Biden had become the main campaign issue. Well, that's now flipped back to where Democrats had hoped it would be. Once this burst of interest in Kamala Harris goes away, it's going to be much easier for them to make Donald Trump and his problems the focus of the fall campaign, whereas that was proving to be almost impossible with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket.
Gerald Seib, thank you very much indeed for that analysis.